Hello, fiends, friends, and familiars. This is Matt Orozco here from Macabre Daily, and I am so excited because I've filled up on spinach, and I'm here to talk with two of the folks behind the upcoming Popeye the Slayer Man film. We have Robert Michael Ryan, who is the director of the film, and then we also have Popeye himself, Jason Stevens, who's taking on the titular role of Popeye. And for those watching this, you will be able to see Popeye the Slayer Man in theaters on March 21st this year. So thank you both so much for being here with me today.
Oh, thanks for having
Thank
us.
you.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Well, I know we don't have all the time in the world, and if we did, we'd take a trip to memory lane to talk all about how we're going to bring all the visual references from Popeye cartoons into a slasher film. But before we get into Popeye, I'm more curious to know because you both have a background in genre film, both in film and television, if you will. What started your loves of horror, respectively?
Jason, go ahead.
I guess I probably had a lot to do with that. Robert and I grew up together. I've known each other since the fourth grade. And when I was 12 years old, my grandmother had one of those VHS cameras that you had to carry the backpack around with. And we started filming Saturday Night Live style sketch comedy, horror movies, like just little shorts, and kind of fell in love with that process back when we were 10, 11, 12, 13 years old. So it kind of grew on from there. Doing it for 40 years now.
Wow. What about your similar story?
Yeah, Jason and I, when we were teenagers and stuff, we were running around 2 in the morning filming horror skits and weird random things. And, much like today, but even back then, you could do really over the top horror stuff on, a lower budget, so to speak, and have a really cool experience doing that.
Yeah, it's so fun to see, folks that grew up together thinking about making films, then actually going and getting to do it. It's like you get to make your make believe your job. So, kudos to you all for holding on to that dream and making it a reality,
Yeah.
as in your adult years. But this one's for you, Robert. I know you weren't behind the writing per se, but given that so much close proximity to yourself to folks like Jason and other people behind like who wrote the script. I'm curious about the origination for the idea for Popeye the Slayer Man.
It was there's this bar in North Hollywood called Tiki No that we're always promoting now. Myself, my co-exec producers Jeff Miller and Kyle Carvin, we would meet up there occasionally and talk about movies. We've worked on movies in the past, and we were talking about what's our next movie going to be. And this was about a year after, like, the Winnie the Pooh movie came out and had been doing really well. And we knew Stewart, the producer of that movie. He's actually distributed a couple of our movies, so we've worked with him. And we were thinking, like, that was a smart thing they did. And we were just kind of curious randomly at the bar. We just like looked up what's coming up. And we said, oh, in like 18 months, Popeye is going to be public domain. And we just thought, oh, that's it. We're going to have to do a Popeye horror film. Like, there's no question. So that was kind of how it all started. And then from there, the three of us just kind of kicked around different script idea, different story ideas of what it was going to be, how Popeye was going to be, whether it was going to be like traditional horror, something maybe kind of comedy camp, or maybe an action. And we kind of settled on something that we felt was well within our wheelhouse. And we're really happy with the way it turned out. And I will say though, and from the beginning, that first meeting, we're talking about Popeye. My first thought was, oh, Jason. I was like, Jason's gonna be Popeye because we want him to be an imposing figure, and
Right.
Jason, as you can see, can play that well. So
I was going to ask, I was going to, given someone, because one of my questions I usually ask when someone's getting ready for a pretty physically intensive role is, how do you prepare? But then I saw a picture of you, Jason. I'm like, oh, you were ready already. So you are like a living Popeye. So were you, did Robert, did you just call Jason right away, say, hey, we've got this crazy idea at the bar. You're going to be Popeye. Jason, were you just like, yep, let's do it?
Uh,
not right away because at that point we didn't even have a story yet. So it was over many months where we were working on the story. But once we had a solid treatment that we were happy with, and we went to John Doolan, who was a screenwriter who we worked with before on other movies. Once we went to him with the movie, we were like starting to figure out the production schedule, like when we were going to try to shoot this, and we had a production team putting it all together. That's when because then it was becoming real. Like, this train is moving now, as opposed to we're thinking about doing this. We're not sure. Like, this was like, no, we're definitely doing it. We're blocking in dates. So at this point, I need to talk to Jason and say, okay, do you want to do this? What's your availability? Like, here's what's happening and stuff. So, but it was just a phone call. I called him up and just said, hey, like, we're doing a Popeye movie, and do you want to play Popeye? And Jason was like, all right, sure.
Is this a big opportunity for you, Jason, as far as playing something as well known as Popeye? Or what was your reaction when you got that phone call?
It's actually kind of funny because I normally am not in front of the camera. I'm usually behind the camera,
Yeah.
usually either directing or producing or whatever. So, I don't necessarily say I have great acting chops. So, but the Popeye character is a pretty easy character for me to play. I mean, I worked on my dialogue with Robert and stuff. Like I said, hey, this is what I was thinking about how Popeye should talk, and he's struggling with things because he's contaminated spinach and all this other stuff. So it's kind of so that was the fun part about being able to step into that role, and being all obviously in full costume and stuff like that really helps play a character or portray a character. And I can easily take direction because I've been directing people for so long. So and Robert's easy. He's super easy to get along with, and as far as his directing style and stuff like that, he's kind of like, hey, he knows the shots he needs to get, but then he goes, okay, if I come up, hey, I think I would. There's a couple things that I did in the Popeye thing that I'm like, hey, well, I want to try this, and sure enough, it made the trailer, it made the movie. I mean, like, so he was open to that kind of stuff, which is kind of cool. So and I knew that going into it.
Yeah, it's nice to have a good collaboration partnership, especially when you can throw ideas around. And I wanted to ask you a little bit, Jason, about the getting ready part for the makeup side of it. What is that? What was that process like? How many hours were you getting sitting in the chair? Because we get glimpses of your character from the trailer, and it looks like there's a significant amount of prosthetics applied to you. I imagine you don't have, three times the size of your bicep forearms. So I'm curious about how long you were in the chair, what it was like, any fun stories to share there.
You know what? Actually, we got the main mask done. I can't remember the name of the company. Robert would know it.
Immortal Masks.
Huh?
Immortal
Immortal
masks.
Masks. Yeah.
Immortal Mask, yeah. So I went down there and got fitted with them, and I went there. I had to go down to their offices in it's Anaheim or whatever a couple times and get try it on and all that kind of stuff, and then for a final rendering of that. And then I know Robert found a prosthetics guy to make the forearms and stuff like that. So that was actually getting into the costume wasn't that hard. The problem is that it doesn't breathe at all. So it's like, and thank God it was like 40 degrees in New York when we were filming this, because if it was 85 degrees, I would have been in the hospital. There's one time I almost passed out. We did about 2 hours of action. And I didn't take the mask off at all, or any of the costume stuff. And I literally took the mask off, and you could see steam coming off of my head. It was just, I was totally overheated. All of a sudden the walls started closing in on me. I was going to black out. So Robert's like, okay, no more than an hour at a time, and Jason needs a break. So I could take the mask off and put it back on. They just had to black out my eyes and do a couple little things like that. But I had to lube it up, the arms up with KY jelly to shove my arms in their thing. So I think they were made for somebody that was way skinnier than me. But we got it on, and luckily the hands, the arms survived until I think the final filming day when we finally punched through the thumb. Stuff like that. All the crap always happens on indie films. So
Right, right. And I'm glad that the prosthetics made it throughout most of, 99% of the filming, because that would have thrown a wrench into things. Um, Now, as far as like what fans can expect, obviously this will be a very different, like when I say fans, I don't so much mean Popeye fans, because I have a strong suspicion that diehard Popeye fans are maybe not necessarily going to be flocking to the theater to see any Popeye slasher movie, but nevertheless, we never know. But more horror fans, what can fans expect from this version of Popeye?
Well, my thing is I'm a big fan of like the kind of the classic horror movies from the 70s and 80s, where it was all practical effects and it just felt very kind of real and gritty, and that kind of grindhouse kind of vibe to it. So when we were coming up with the story, we're kind of figuring out the logistics of how we're going to do this. My big thing was like, I don't want to do CG. I don't want to rely on blood spraying out, with CG stuff. So we found a guy, RJ Young, who was local to the area that we were shooting in. Great guy. And I basically said to him, like, I want to do this as a 80s horror film. So I want real blood. I'm sorry. I want actual blood, not human blood, but like on screen blood, not CG blood. And I want all these effects, all these different kills to have to be practical and not rely on, oh, we're going to fix this in post. And so that was my big thing, and that's what I think is going to be unique about our film versus a lot of other films where they say, oh, we'll have a small little cut, but we're going to have blood spray in post production, or we're going to do this kind of thing, and we don't really do any of that. It's whatever. I think when I told RJ, I said I want a gallon of blood used for every single kill, and so I sent him just gallons. He told me what it needed. I shipped him many gallons of blood, and I think we went through all of it by the
Wow.
time we finished filming. So there wasn't much left over. So you're going to see a lot of real blood, like practical blood. Sorry, not real blood, practical blood on the screen, and none of that CG stuff.
Well, I feel like if this were AI transcribing this, it would run away with the real blood in Popeye movie as the headline. But
Yeah, I can't keep
um,
saying real blood. Yeah, I know.
but it is. I think a whole lot of horror fans do want and expect more practical effects these days, or at least have an appreciation for it. It isn't done entirely by CG, so it's always nice to hear that folks like yourself, filmmakers, go into this with the mindset that we want to try and replicate this the same way movies that we grew up watching or were affectionate for. And to you both, I'm curious to know, kind of more broadly speaking, about the public domain side of things. It's becoming a genre within and of itself of, as these characters are coming out of licensing rights and intellectual property arrangements. Um, what do you think this means for the genre as a whole? And then do you see it more as a net positive, a net negative, or maybe just somewhere in the neutral area?
Jason, you want to?
Uh, yeah, I see it as as kind of a neutral area because obviously, if you take a character and all you're doing is taking the character itself of the actual persona of the character and just making him run around and kill people, then it's just a guy in a mask killing people. But if you kind of go with the classic, okay, I mean, we use spinach, we use references to olive oil and all that kind of stuff in our move in our version of it, and I think that is the true like the I mean, we didn't like cheese out on it. We didn't just okay,
Right.
we're gonna have this guy with big forearms running around killing people. So it's like so an opportunity, I think, for these public domain characters to have fun with the public domain characters, and I think that's what we did with our Popeye anyway.
Are you, Robert?
Yeah, just to continue with that, it's like, yeah, so like Jason said, we didn't want to just do a slasher film where Popeye's evil and he goes around killing people and that's all we care about. It was from the beginning, it was like, how are we gonna tell the story that stays in the kind of Popeye lore of the original Popeye, but also is like an actual story that would get people emotionally involved. I know it sounds kind of cheesy to say when you're talking about like a horror film, but you definitely want to have connections and you want to have a couple twists in the story that people maybe don't see coming. And we also didn't want Popeye just to be this mindless killing machine. We wanted there to be some humanity there. And that's one of the things that I think as you watch the film, you start to realize, oh, there's something else going on here. This isn't just a guy who's going around killing people for no reason. There's something going on in his head that is kind of revealed later in the movie. So I think those kind of elements that we really leaned in on, I think kind of help differentiate. And I think people who are doing the public domain film don't just say, oh, Snow White is public domain. We're going to make her a psychotic killer who goes around killing people. It's like, okay, that could be the tagline, but there's got to be a story there. It's going to be something compelling that makes people say, this is an interesting take on this kind of lore. And this is like maybe an alternate universe kind of version of this character where there's stuff going on, there's background, there's stories, it's not so two dimensional. And I think that's kind of the key to make it interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I almost see these a lot like remakes in that if you just were trying to carbon copy something that came before, and update it, you're likely not going to get much out of that new version except just a maybe glossier look. Whereas these
Yeah.
public domain horror films present an opportunity to give something different. And I think the best of them, like we recently watched the Peter Pan film earlier this year and had a blast with it. It's just a great way to take that character in a different direction. So I think Popeye is such an interesting character to focus on because the lore within Popeye is it's interesting, but it's not so broad and massive that you have to account for a lot of things. And if this does well, which we, touch wood, it does, you've got plenty to go off with a sequel with things like, a Bruno tie-in or something like that at some point.
Well, over the
Um,
next few years, more of the Popeye characters will be coming in public domain. So, yeah, so there's more opportunities there.
It's an exciting time for folks that are looking at public domain horror, that's for sure. And the last question for you both, um, if you were asked to program a double feature with Popeye the Slayer Man, what film do you think would go really well with it? Or maybe not well at all, just would be a fun thing to make people sit through. So, Jason, I'll start with you and then Robert over to you.
Oh God, I
You got like a million
I,
films running through the head now.
yeah, there's a million films that that you could pair, but I want to say that the Popeye version that we did was a little bit more like the Michael Myers Halloween, where there's this ominous figure hiding in the shadows, kind of a thing. And he appears and he disappears, and he knows his world better than anybody else, and therefore he's got these people trapped. And I think so. Basically, I would go with Halloween because I'm like that's the kind of feel I get from our Popeye. Obviously on a different scale, but I would go
Love
with
it.
original Halloween.
Yeah, that would probably be my choice too. But I think another close movie that would be similar would be something like the Friday the 13th films. The Jason Voorhees, where he's a silent, menacing figure. Um, but ours has a little more of a reasoning behind the killing, but
Right.
something like that, where people are just like, we're invading this person's space and we're paying the price for it. So
Yeah, I would love to see like kind of how Alamo's Drafthouse does it, where they play some like introductory vignettes that are all somewhat related to the film you're about to see. So you get some like old Popeye cartoons and then a double slasher bill. So for folks that are seeing this in an Alamo, hopefully you get that experience. But I just want to thank you both so much for taking the time to chat about the film. I know it's a few weeks away from release, so looking forward to seeing what everyone's reactions are to it on the 21st of March. And again, thank you, Jason. Thank you, Robert, for your time. And for folks watching this, you can catch Popeye the Slayer Man for yourself in a theater amongst your peers, like you should watch a horror movie on the 21st of March this year. And then hopefully, I'm sure VOD and physical releases to follow shortly after. So thank you both so
on the
much for
same
the
day,
time.
actually.
Oh,
Yeah,
same day. Oh, so same day
yeah,
for
March
digital.
21st. Yeah,
Oh,
VOD
perfect.
and in theaters. Yeah. So
So in that case, if you can't get to the theater, even though you should, you still have no excuse. Popeye's coming for you on the 21st, no matter where you are.
that's right.
Thank you both so much for the time.
Thanks, Matt. Appreciate it.